We know that the government does some shady shit. Did the government go that far into trying to wipe him off the face of the earth? It's possible. There's no question in my mind the government is not above that. Ghost in the Night with Phil Sams. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another bonus episode of Ghost in the Night, a Hauntings and Paranormal podcast. Now, these bonus episodes are just kind of me ranting, essentially. No real topic or themes. It could be anything that has to do with the paranormal or just what's on my mind for that day. These come out once a month or whenever. Now, I have recently started a Patreon page, which I am going to... Basically, how the Patreon page is going to work, you know, if you head on over to Patreon, you will see all that, or go to ghostandnightpodcast.com. I'll kind of explain it more, or follow me on Twitter at night_ghost. I'll kind of explain it a little bit better, but just kind of give a rough idea of how the Patreon is going to work. If you've listened to this podcast, which I'm sure you have, and if you're new, welcome. But how it's going to work is my podcast does have ads, pre-roll, and then some host read stuff throughout in the beginning or mid part of the podcast. Now, as a Patreon subscriber, you will get completely ad-free podcast. Now, it's brand new. I'm still getting it up and running, and it's actually up. But this is one of maybe the first or second time, depending on when I release this episode, that I've talked about it. There's 2 tiers as of right now, and I'm going to try to keep it as simple and as possible, because I don't like complex things, and I'm sure you don't as well. So this is kind of how it's going to work. For first tier, you get completely ad-free stuff, and the next tier up, you get, some live. I'm hoping to do some live stuff. You get early access with, I think on all tiers. I have to look, but you get early access to these bonus episodes. So if you're hearing this now, if you're a Patreon subscriber, you could have heard this before everybody else with no ads. That is kind of the concept. Basically, it's just a way to give back to my listeners. The community is growing. I really appreciate each and every one of you guys, and I'm thankful for everybody that sends me feedback or interacts with me on social media or however you do it. Send me an email at gitnpodcast@gmail.com. You're always welcome to contact me if you have an idea for a show, or you want to be on the show because you have a awesome paranormal experience, or you have a interesting thought about a topic I've covered. Maybe we can set that up to where you can actually come on the show and be a part of the show. But now that that's out of the way, this is just a bonus episode that, I wanted to put out. Now, I've actually recorded this episode earlier, but it's turned out really, really shitty. I've recently moved, and I'm kind of in a makeshift studio. My old place had my original studio where I did all my recordings and everything. This I haven't built. I've moved, and I'm in the process of planning and building my new studio. So this is just kind of a makeshift studio I'm doing. So the audio, I've been kind of screwing with the audio. The last episode that I released, the audio sucked serious ass. Who the hell's texting me? But I'm working. It's getting better. I think this is going to be better. But like I said, I recorded this episode when I first moved to my temporary setup, and the audio was such shit, I just scrapped it. So this is kind of going to be what this is, just me doing it again. It's interesting, and it's a topic that I don't cover much here on the podcast, which I'm going to start doing a little bit more often because I'm fascinated with it. And that is, I don't do a lot of alien or UFO type stuff. But with the recent appearance of Bob Lazar on the Joe Rogan podcast, I found it more interesting. Now, I was in high school when Lazar's story broke. It was fascinating, but it still wasn't that big of a deal. We didn't have the internet back then, so we kind of got it a little late, and it didn't go viral back then. But I had heard of it, and as I got older through my 20s, I heard more and started seeing more documentaries on it. But so I have some thoughts on it, and it's really kind of, his story is very, very fascinating to me for several reasons, and that is because he got shit on so much when it came out, when he came out with his claims and accusations, or his story, however you want to view what he said and presented to the public at that time. And I had my thoughts on it at the time, and my thoughts really haven't changed that much over the years. Just so for the sake of full disclosure, I do believe there's life out there now, and I believe I've said this in an earlier podcast, but I'm not 100% sure that they are coming and visiting us here. I don't know for a fact. It wouldn't surprise me if they did, and I wouldn't be shocked if they never been here at all. The UFO phenomenon is 100% real. Now, that is something that I really think people misuse the term of UFO. When you say UFO, you are not necessarily talking about aliens, but that is what everybody thinks about when you say the term or the phrase UFO, or unidentified flying object. Doesn't mean aliens. It means we don't. UFO stands for unidentified flying object. It means we don't know what the fuck it is. So to immediately jump to alien version of a UFO is, it's not smart, and that misrepresents what it really is. We don't know what it is. It could be an alien. It could be, one of our top secret military planes or drones of things such as that, or enemy of the state's secret technology. We don't know what it is, hence the term unidentified. But when Bob Lazar came out, he and his story, people, that was a different time, and people really were skeptical. The UFO crate, you were kind of looked upon if you kind of gave any credence to the UFO phrase or UFO phase. Fad's the word I'm looking for. Shit, can't even think today. You were kind of looked down upon it if you, believed in UFOs. People kind of looked at you as a crackpot. And that's changed. It's loosened up a little bit here as the years have went by, and there's more people talking about it. With the addition to the internet to the world, people have access to more information than they ever have in history. So it's lightened up a little. People, I think the UFO phenomenon is, people will say it's losing its steam, but because of the invention of smartphones and everybody has a video recorder or a camera in their pocket these days, people have made the claims that if the UFO phenomenon was real, then we would have a lot more evidence because of everybody has the phone and everybody can take pictures, and the quality is much better than what it was in the 80s and early 90s, which is a valid point. But most people are in the dark, and most people aren't spending their time looking up at the sky or whatever and filming anything. So it's a matter of timing, in my opinion. I could be wrong. If you have an opinion on it, let me know. Like I said, send me an email at gitnpodcast@gmail.com, or reach out to me on Twitter at @night_ghost. Those are I respond to everybody that sends me stuff. But I don't know about like I said, I don't know. But getting back to Bob Lazar and his appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, people have criticized him and threw him under the bus, saying he's a crackpot. He made it all up. He was just a attention getter, which is all very possible and is not out of the realm of possibility. I think that is a very good possibility that he could be all that. I mean, I have my opinion, and I will share it with you. And like I said, my opinion really hasn't changed that much over the past 20 some odd years, or even 20, almost 30 years now, I guess, somewhere around there. But, and just so people know, if you're not familiar with it, there's a new documentary that came out not too long ago that covers his story, which I've seen, and it's very interesting. And I learned stuff about that situation and him that I didn't know, and also some of the stuff that has happened during that makes it very interesting. And if you watch that, you will understand what I'm talking about. And his appearance on Joe Rogan, I've formed a pretty good opinion, and I think my opinion is pretty solid, and I'm not going crazy with it, but I have a good idea of or a good feel of whether or not he's telling us the truth or he's completely full of shit. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, basically, just for backstory, Bob Lazar worked at Lockheed Martin and somehow, without getting too technical, ended up getting a job at Area 51. Now, everybody knows of Area 51. The government has acknowledged its existence. It's out there in the Nevada desert, where they do all the testing, or do a lot of testing for secret military planes and things such as that. And he worked out there. Now, according to him, his job was to diagnose and back engineer or figure out how a propulsion system that they had there, which most likely was alien, or alien to us. We didn't know what it was. It didn't come from this planet, from Earth or whatever. It didn't come here. There was something about this, and his job was to back engineer it and find out what made it work, how it worked, and how we could use it. Now, he has said, and he said this on the podcast, that he saw a flying saucer. But, what a lot of people leave out is, he even said in the podcast, he saw the saucer. He was walking through a hangar with a group fairly early on in his time there, and there were several there in different hangars that you could see through. You could see into the different hangars. But the most interesting thing about this is, he even states that when he saw this saucer, it even had an American flag on it. So it was one of ours, essentially. He didn't say it was an alien spacecraft. It was one of something that we had built. And when I say we, I mean the government had built and were testing. So, and that in itself kind of clarifies some of the UFO phenomenon. We are seeing some of these things that are unexplained, or we as a general public can't explain, probably are military or government top secret programs, and they're testing this, and we are seeing these items flying in the sky. Now, the real question is whether this is alien technology, or is it our technology that we as the general society, or we as a public, don't know about yet, which is very, very possible as well. If everybody in the conspiracy world, or anybody that knows anything about this kind of stuff, understands technology is I've heard it say that technology is always 10 years more advanced than what we have today. They release it to us slowly but surely. So everything that the high tech stuff that we have today, actually, they say was probably invented and in use in some sort of capacity by the government 10 years ago. So, but like I said, his job was to back engineer this. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, that was a good one, to figure out that this was something not of this earth. And he states this clearly. He did not think this was from one of our propulsion systems. They were trying to back engineer, like I said, and blah, 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 and make it work. And how can we build this propulsion system? Because it didn't work like a normal propulsion system that we use today. It wasn't what we associate with jet planes or anything. It's just something different, kind of an anti-gravity type scenario. And people, when he came out with this, they were just, this guy was crazy. People did research saying he didn't go to Caltech, and from Caltech. He wasn't at MIT. If I'm not mistaken, apparently his degree is from Caltech, and he did take some classes at MIT, but people said he never went there. There's no record of all this. And they even went as far to say that he never worked at Lockheed Martin. Now, when he came out with his story, there was a report. Everybody in this genre or this field knows of George Knapp. He has broken a lot of stories, and he broke this story to him. Now, Knapp is a legitimate journalist working for a TV station. He broke the story, and now he's kind of considered the UFO guy, but he is a legitimate journalist, incredible journalist. So he knows how to do the research and fact check and all of that happy shit. And when, he did his due diligence, they did find a phone directory with his name in it for Lockheed Martin, showing that he was an employee there. And in the podcast, he talked about he took people to Lockheed Martin and walked them around and showed them, had knowledge of the inner workings of how the building was laid out and such. Whether or not he worked at Lockheed Martin, I'm going to go out and say he did. And this is something that they talked about in the podcast, that all this stuff that people said he didn't do, we know that the government does some shady shit, and they are not above wiping out somebody's identity. Now, is it possible? I'll throw this to you guys. Is it possible that he leaked this information, went public with this information? The Men in Black, for a lack of a better term, or that organization or that part of the government, whatever you want to say, however you want to phrase it, kind of took upon themselves to discredit him and kind of wipe him out and get rid of some of this stuff that would discredit him and make sure people would think, okay, this guy's just a fraud, he's a liar. In the podcast, he talks about his birth certificate. There's no record of his birth certificate. His own mother was upset because she couldn't get his birth certificate. Did the government go that far into trying to wipe him off the face of the earth in terms of paper trail? It's possible. Like I said, the government does some shady shit. There's no question in my mind the government is not above that. And that is very possible that they did that and actively tried to discredit him in that manner. People that he had known or worked with or were acquaintances with, they went after them. These people went to him and said, hey, this is going on. We're getting threatened with, and that world's not that big, so that people know each other, and these people had security clearances that they had to worry about and stuff like that. So they attacked him. They attacked the people in his inner circle or his acquaintances. So this was a big deal. So obviously the government made some sort of attempt to discredit him in one way, shape, or form. And my thought is, why would they go to the trouble? If this guy was a crackpot, this guy was a liar, why would they go to this trouble to actually do this? Where there's smoke, there's generally fire, and you need to keep that in mind when it comes to this story. What else? In the podcast, they talk, Joe Rogan does a great job. He always does, of doing interviews. I love the way he does interviews. It's more of a conversation, and he's drawing out this information. It was obvious through that interview that he wasn't comfortable. I'm talking about Bob Lazar, was not comfortable. If you listen to it, he was talking about having, a migraine was coming on. He didn't want to really, he wasn't 100% behind doing the podcast. The filmmaker of the documentary kind of told him it would be good, let's do this, and he was on the podcast with him. That, it was obvious it wasn't a fan of doing the podcast, but he did it to get the story back out there and kind of in his own words, essentially. And that has been his kind of MO. After the story broke back in the late 80s, early 90s. I think it was 89, somewhere around that range. Don't hold me to that. He disappeared. Now, when, somebody doing this for their 15 minutes of fame doesn't disappear. They milk that shit for all it's worth. And, Lazar didn't, to my knowledge, hasn't made any money off this with this story, either back then or now. From my understanding, what money this documentary made, or whatever money came in on his behalf for this documentary, was donated to, I believe, a science department in some school in Michigan, something like that. The point of the story is he didn't profit personally from this, which, is a check mark. And okay, there might be something to this, because the 15 minutes of fame, he had it and didn't want it. He's not making money off of it, which would be another motive. So why go to this extreme with this and tell this crazy story if you're not going to get anything out of it but hardship and ridicule? So that's a check mark in that favor. Now, as I watched this interview, and some of these things I knew, some of them I did not know, there's a lot made up. What he spoke of back in the late 80s, early 90s, of like the element that powered this propulsion system. They called it element 115. It wasn't on the periodic table back then. Now it is. They found it, or been able to create it. I'm not a chemist, so I don't know, or geologist, or whatever the fuck, I don't know. I just know it wasn't around back then. He said there was this element. Now there is. So anybody wants to educate me on that or has more knowledge about that, is more than welcome to reach out and fill me in a little bit better. I think I get the point across. I'm not an expert, but I think my point hasn't been made. So this is very fascinating to me. The hand scanner, which kind of like for ID purposes, people, where you put your hand in, it apparently measured your bone density or bone length, which is, some people, they say, is just like a fingerprint. Back when he said this shit was crazy, that people said this shit was crazy, and that doesn't exist. That's not real. Yet now they found that, yes, these type machines, or these palm reader type things, were in use in that time. And he said they used them. And there's been pictures of them. And I believe they showed pictures of them on the podcast if you watched it on YouTube. So there's another check mark. Things are starting to line up. Now let me go ahead and give you my opinion. I do believe he worked there personally. His story in that regards checks out. I do believe he was working on trying to back engineer something. Now, you can, whether this was alien or some enemy of the state technology, I don't know. I don't know the details. I'm pretty sure he was there. He worked on something, and that is where I'm going to leave it at that. Was it alien? Was it from the crash in Roswell? Your guess is as good as mine. It's very possible, but I'm not going to say with 100% certainty that is what happened. But I'm positive from everything I've heard and listened to, I think he did work there, and I think he's telling the truth about that scenario. Too much is lined up. There's too many clues, and to actually completely say he's completely making this up. And if you watch the video, he is a very intelligent man, and he speaks about the topic and what he's talking about, these, the scientific stuff of it, very well. I mean, I'm not a scientist and never will be, don't claim to be the smartest man in the world, but he speaks very intelligently about it, and he acts like he knows what he's doing. Now, that, yeah, sure, that can be fake, but from watching him, that is another check mark in okay, he might be telling the truth. If worst case scenario, he really believes what he's saying, and that's a story for a different day or a different topic. But, that is pretty much how we need to look at that. Now, if you look at how he spoke and how he was telling the story, I'm pretty good at talking to people and reading them and kind of knowing when maybe somebody's a little bit full of shit. And from watching him during this interview, he was obviously uncomfortable. The way he recalled the story and was telling the story was very common of how people actually do it. The story has always been the same, but there was, the way he told it and had to try to recall certain things and made little mistakes here and there to where, he said something, he said, oh, wait a minute, no, if this was before that, that kind of thing. That's very common, and that is how our memory works. So I don't think he was just reciting from memory a script that he's been working on for 30 years. So that's another, if I had to say it, he's telling the truth. I honestly think there's something to this because of all the things I've lined up, how he acted, his not wanting credit or 15 minutes of fame or whatever, or his shyness about or lack of enthusiasm about the publicity that he's received from this, the lack of monetary gain in this, and his general demeanor and how he reacts to telling it and how he doesn't want this. It all lines up to a man that is telling somewhat of the truth. And he doesn't say alien. He is honest about, I don't know if this is alien technology. I just know it's technology we didn't have. That is, how he viewed it or how he expressed it. Everybody else jumped on the alien bandwagon and immediately say that's what it is. So I don't know, honestly. I do think he worked there, like I said. I do think he worked on back engineering, something that we were not familiar with. Now, the question is, was this portions of the alien craft that has crashed here, maybe the one when that crashed in Roswell? I don't know. It's very possible. Here's the way I look at it. It wouldn't surprise me. Yes, it wouldn't surprise me if it was, and it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't. I just don't know if that is part of it. So I think he's honestly telling the truth, or his story is truthful in all those factors I just stated. I don't think he's a con artist just looking for 15 minutes of fame. But I could be wrong. He could just be an amazing fucking actor. It's very possible. So I don't know. Let me know what you think. Like I said, reach out to me at Twitter at @night_ghost. That is really the best way to get a hold of me. Once again, don't forget about the Patreon. If you want completely an ad-free version of the regular podcast and early access to these bonus episodes, or even a live recording to where maybe you can get involved with a chat or whatever. I want to make the Patreon as more, to give to bonus content plus maybe some early access and make it a little bit more interactive. Videos on YouTube, they're there. And I should say that really the Patreon podcast that is shown is going to be a video, some sort of video form. It's not going to be an RSS feed like what you hear when you listen to this podcast via iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, my favorite Podcoin, or whatever podcast player you use. It's not an RSS feed. It's just I do video versions of the podcast, whether it's like this, me talking, or it's a still photo or the thumbnail for the episode or something, my voice with a picture of some sort. That is what the Patreon episodes are going to be, and even these bonus episodes. Now, these bonus episodes, I'm hoping to always be pretty much just like this, me just ranting in a microphone with a camera on it. Let me know what you think about these. If you think they're a waste of my time, feel free to tell me that. But be sure to leave a review on whichever podcast player you use. Like I said, I use Podcoin, but if you use iTunes, leave us a review and rate us. Stitcher, be sure to subscribe. Anything we can help to get us up in the search results. I mean, the viewership or listenership, I should say, of this podcast is growing. It's actually astonishing how fast and how many people actually are listening to this, or at least, starting to listen to it. I mean, I do get pretty good retention, it seems like. So hopefully it'll keep growing. And if you like the podcast, be sure, everybody knows that crazy friend that has, an interest in the paranormal. So we are going to hit those paranormal topics, share it with those friends, and leave us a review. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you do want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, I'm not big on YouTube. I don't really care that much about YouTube, honestly. But if you want to subscribe to us on YouTube, all the podcasts are up there as well. And I will continue to put the podcast on that medium. Now, those will still have some ads. They won't have the pre and post roll ads like on the podcast, but they will still contain all the host reach stuff that I do, or anytime I do that. I'm not going to waste my time to take that out. Those are still going to be in there. Like I said, I don't put a lot of effort into YouTube. Everybody that takes in this podcast seems to want the audio version and listen to it rather than watch it. So that is what I'm going to focus on. I don't think there's anything else for right now. I think that's it. So that's going to do it for this bonus episode of Ghost in the Night. Like I said, if you have an experience, if you live in a haunted house, or I've recently covered the demonic aspect of the paranormal in a series, 4 podcasts essentially, where I had a good interview with an exorcist. Be sure to check those out if you haven't checked those out already. If you've had an experience with a demon or any kind of poltergeist or any kind of spirit, or if you've had a UFO experience, if you've been abducted, reach out. I'd love to have you on the podcast. Or you just want to talk about it and you have an expertise in paranormal area, let me know. We will set something up and I will talk to you and we will get you on the podcast. I do have I definitely have a really good interview coming up. And I'm kind of might do another series type thing. I'm really thinking about some stuff here that I'm really fascinated with, and I'm going to do some podcasts about that. And I'm hoping to have an interview with somebody on that topic. So I'm really looking forward to the next month or so of podcast episodes. I think you're going to like them. I know I'm going to enjoy doing them because it's really some mind-blowing stuff that we're going to cover. So be sure to be on the lookout for all those. Like I said, follow me on Twitter. That is where you get all the updates and everything for the podcast. Know when they're coming out, and you'll get a heads up on what they are. So we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.